Good afternoon, Americans, and welcome to the Jeff Santos Show and our first ever attempt at a Zoom meetup, a progressive fest, if you might. We have a great 3 hours for you here today. We have an amazing lineup of journalists, of advocates, folks who are the executive directors of some of the best progressive organizations in the country, and some of the really great callers to the Jeff Santos Show. You'll be seeing and hearing them. We'll be replaying this broadcast on Monday, Memorial Day. Everybody should have a day off. And we'll be doing this hopefully throughout the next couple of months to do the Zoom feature. It's not something you could do every day, and I think I would drive my producer Rona Fried right to a mental institution. So we won't do that every day. It's going to be 3 hours, folks. I'm going to give you my views on where the progressive movement is going, and then we're going to open it up to our great cast of characters. You know, my feeling here is that without Bernie Sanders, we need to sort of think how to evolve, but at the same time keep his core. And if you think about his core of Medicare for all, $15 minimum wage, a laser focus on 4 years of free public university, the idea of taking the military budget down and putting dollars into Green New Deal, to infrastructure, rebuild roads and rail and so forth. Those are things that has to stay. Now, can he bring in other people who may not necessarily agree with them? And there's some blueprint for that. Just recently, Tim Ryan joined with Ro Khanna to co-sponsor the $2K a month, low-hanging fruit. I can't imagine why we can't do that. But then again, that's the Democratic Party under Pelosi, Biden, and Schumer. Okay. The other element, of course, is that this Paycheck Recovery Act is something I think is really going to be a big way to get moderates. We hear about the Michigan representative freshman coming on board. And it's basically Jayapal and her team and the Progressive Caucus, 100 members, that are reaching out, not Pelosi, who basically knocked this thing down in negotiations to get it through the Senate. So we're going to have to really evolve, but not lose our core principles. And it's something that we're going to try to get a perspective from a lot of our folks this hour and next. And we're going to spend, some time also with our great callers, John in Minneapolis and Peter in Plant City, Florida. Later, Mark and Steve, both from California, will also weigh in with their thoughts too. So we're going to do this first hour. Brian Garvey of Mass Peace Action, who is to my right with the map on the wall, is probably our youngest member, but one of the wisest. It's great to have Brian on board. Rona Fried, who is on the phone only of sustainablebusiness.com. Rona, can you hear me?
I can.
Very good. It's great to have you on board. We hope to have Frank Watkins. Is Frank on the phone? No, Frank?
I can hear you.
There you go. Fantastic.
You can hear.
Operation Rainbow Push senior advisor to Reverend Jesse Jackson, has been for over 30 years. We have some great journalists. David Dayen of the American Prospect, the executive editor, is with us in the Paul Lynn Center Square. Thank you, David. Robert Borosage is with us to his right, Campaign for America's Future, part of People's Action, and of course the co-director of Campaign for America's Future. Robert, welcome. It's great to have, of course, another great organization with us, Roots Action, and that is right down below David is our good friend Norman Solomon from San Francisco, one of the most beautiful city in America anyways. And we are very excited to have Norman with us. Also with us are two great callers, John Davis from our great friends in Minneapolis, and Peter from Plant City, Florida, is also with us as well. He is not on video today. I'm going to want to start off with, I think, looking at the issues that we need to really focus in. And I'll start with you, Robert Borosage. It seems to me that we have to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. Go after Biden on one side, and push him. At the same time, because we have a couple of months to work with, go after Pelosi and to a lesser extent Schumer. What do you think are the ways that progressives have to push on this agenda?
Well, let me try to reframe that a little bit. I think we have to go after Trump and continue to do that, and go after McConnell, who is stopping everything in the Senate thus far, and then continue to push Biden and Pelosi and Schumer. I do think it's a mistake to not put emphasis on those who are standing in the way of just common sense, whether it's vote by mail or aiding cities and states, and that is McConnell and Trump and their followers.
Norman, your thoughts on what Robert had to say? Where do we put our focus?
Well, I agree with that. The one overarching imperative is to defeat Donald Trump. And at the same time, it's essential to not only have a what we don't want campaign. Clearly that failed 4 years ago in the person of Hillary Clinton, but also really have a program that is exciting, energizing, and visionary, not only because that is the other part of the equation. We don't want to just fight the right. We want to move forward a progressive agenda, but also tactically, we don't want to have a fall off. We need an increase in voting from the Democratic Party base, young people, people of color, and so forth. And that really is the formula we've got to put together for victory in November.
Frank Watkins, the issue of voting and voting rights has been something that you and, of course, Operation Rainbow Push has been working on. Are we in a dangerous situation here? We don't have a vote by mail. Michigan is getting penalized in this situation. How are you concerned? We could potentially not even have an election in November. Frank, can you hear me?
Well, yeah, I hear you. This is strange. I don't exactly know what I'm on, but
you're on the Jeff Santos show anyways.
Okay. Well, I think Trump is going to lose all the fights around the mail-in. I mean, Utah, Oregon, they already do virtually all of their voting by mail. Trump does his voting by mail. More and more states are voting by mail. Historically, Republicans have used mail-in Florida to try to win Florida. So I think he's going to lose in the popular among the people, and he's going to lose in the courts if he takes it to the courts, in my judgment. As far as who we target, I mean, we have to take Trump out of the presidency. We have to take McConnell out of Senate leadership and take control of the Senate at the same time that we're contemplating, if depending on what the political result of that is, we have to propose a progressive agenda, for the Democratic Party and challenge the Democratic Party to get in line with the future of the Democratic Party.
David Dayen, the executive editor of the American Prospect, you have talked in the past, David, about putting the pressure on Pelosi and the Progressive Caucus, could get maybe 30 of their 100 members to sort of kind of hold her. Is it now time, with Jayapal trying to do this Paycheck Recovery Act to push on $2K a month? What are you hearing there, and what is the pressure points at this point?
I mean, the ultimate pressure left the building at the end of March when Republicans successfully secured a $4.5 trillion corporate bailout, which was the only thing that they really desired throughout this entire debate. So we're kind of left grabbing at straws. With respect to paycheck security, it's actually kind of an interesting debate over what's the right way to deliver immediate near-term relief during this pandemic. Do you want to do it through the unemployment system, which is the way we're kind of doing it right now? Over $60 billion has been released through the unemployment system just in the first 2 weeks of May. The backlog that states were going through is finally starting to work itself through. Because of the $600 a week flat benefit that has been added to unemployment, there are many at the low end of the earning scale that are making more in this unemployment position than they made in their jobs. So that's one way of doing it. And then the other way is through paycheck guarantee, which is the government essentially guaranteeing the payroll support, and that way people can keep their health insurance, which is at this moment tied to employment, and they can keep connected to their job so that when this ends, they can perhaps keep that job. So there's kind of an interesting debate over what is the best form of this relief to take and what does it mean for the future. Obviously, if you're doing unemployment where people are getting more money to stay out of the employment system, that increases worker power to a certain degree. It says that in order for businesses to attract them back, they're going to have to raise their wages. So there are arguments on both sides. We're actually going to do a symposium at the Prospect with some of the leaders of this, the big supporters on both sides of this to talk about it. I think it's something that the left should really debate.
I agree. Robert, I know you have to run soon. What David is saying, are you fully on board with that?
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the problem with the plus up on unemployment, the $600 addition, of course, is that it expires at the end of July, I believe. And Lindsey Graham, among others, have said it won't be extended except over their dead bodies. So if we could get the Paycheck Guarantee Program engaged, I think it would be, in terms of a precedent for the future, it might be the more preferable. But it's good to have a debate on it, I suppose. I do think that getting people at the middle and low income workers extended benefits now, as this economy is going to, if it recovers, it will recover incredibly slowly, and a lot of businesses aren't going to be there at the end of the day. So having extended benefits, I think, is really important at this point.
Excellent. Well, one of the things that I think we need to figure out here is to get more money into the Green New Deal and to get some jobs out of it, and at the same time to reduce the military footprint that we have, particularly in the Middle East. And I go to our good friend Brian Garvey at Mass Peace Action, and then Rona Fried to comment on this. I mean, what can we expect, Brian, whether it's in 2021 or going forward, in terms of reducing the amount of money that is in the military budget right now? I know Representative Omar from Minnesota had something yesterday that she's trying to do in this legislation. What can we do now, and what can we do in 2021, Brian?
Well, I think the military budget is going to be very hotly debated in the next couple of months because we really are feeling a lot of stress, a lot of budgetary stress with the economic decline that we've already seen, and I think more to come. But to get back to what David was saying earlier, this massive amount of money that has been spent by Congress, appropriated by Congress, kind of dispels the notion that we can't pay for these things that we want, that we can't pay for Medicare for all, that we can't pay for a Green New Deal or decent infrastructure for our people. I think they made that very clear when they dumped so much money into bailing out businesses, including airlines and cruise lines that don't even fly under the flag of the United States. And I think that is a message that appeals to broadly across the political spectrum. even to those that voted for Mr. Trump in 2016. One of the benefits he had when he was running that time is he had no record. That is not true this time around. He made several. He promised everything in the world when he was running in 2016, and I don't believe he's delivered. He ran to Hillary Clinton's left on peace issues in many instances, and he just didn't follow through with it. He's increased arms sales, increased drone strikes, almost started a war with Iran. These are now things that are on his record. We should call him on that. Because I think he may try and run to Biden's left on war and peace issues again, but he has a record, and I think we ought to call him out on it.
Rona Fried, obviously the Green New Deal is something that is not only very popular, particularly amongst young people, but it's a job creator, and a lot of people who work in labor are always looking for jobs. Well, I mean, obviously, whether it's wind turbines or solar panels or whatever you can do, including rail jobs, those are all big parts of it. How do you view all of the discussions that we've had so far? How does the environment, get benefited? And obviously, we're running out of time.
I think, although we've proven that we can spend trillions of dollars, through the coronavirus thing, I think it will actually make it harder, not easier, to get massive amounts of spending for the Green New Deal or for anything having to do with climate change right now, because I think the line will be from the Republican side that we've already spent everything we could possibly spend and we can't spend any more money. That's what I expect to hear from them.
Well, yeah, that's a typical Mitch McConnell line. To take it back, David and Robert, because I know both of you are short on time here. Is there an opportunity here? I've been saying this for a while, to really go after Mitch, unlike we've never seen before. Whether it's Pelosi or somebody she designates, this to me, we can't hold back. Because as Rona says, it's going to be dead on arrival unless somebody pushes at him. Now, he's up for re-election as well. That's an added benefit. I think that Booker is probably a stronger candidate than the McGrath, who's more of the corporate candidate, but, we'll see about that. David?
Yeah, I think Mitch McConnell has, over the course of his career, shown himself to be fairly impervious to public opinion. He doesn't seem to care what people think of him, and he has carried out the dictates of his funders and conservative ideologues basically forever. And as I keep going back to, it's difficult to see what the leverage is right now on the Republican Party. McConnell has said that, as Bob mentioned, this unemployment piece will expire at the end of July. We don't have paycheck guarantee in place, and it's not like McConnell is gung-ho about replacing and substituting anything with that. So this is a real crunch time moment. You're talking about, if that indeed expires in July, about half of people's incomes, money going into the economy, vanishing in from one day to the next. That is how you go from where we are right now, which is terribly high unemployment, but people still having enough money to survive, to an actual depression. I think to the extent that politicians try to pressure other politicians, that is going to be seen as politics and easily dismissed. To the extent that you actually get that situation of severe economic pain in the country, and there's an organic uprising of individuals, which we are seeing to a certain degree on the labor side of things, in terms of workplaces, essential workers, wildcat strikes, things like that. That I think has more potential to move the political system, as it did in late March when we suddenly got a $2 trillion bill when previously that would have been unthinkable in Washington. And a lot of that had to do, frankly, with the stock market faltering, because politicians see the stock market as the economy when we all know that those two are not at all the same thing. So I think it's going to take something more organic, real popular uprising in order to make the political system move. And then obviously the elections in November will determine the course of future interventions in the economy.
Norman, you're in the Roots Action. You're in California, where David is too. One in Southern California, one in San Francisco. Do you sense that there is time to be able, as David is saying, to put this together? I know that you were working closely with Senator Sanders and others, but do we have enough time to pull this off?
Well, Roots Action and now the Bernie Delegates Network 2020 were, of course, independent of the official Sanders campaign.
Right.
Following on what David said, I agree, and I would add that I think a lot of the vilification of McConnell or Pelosi, for that matter, it's perceived from the grassroots as just more inside baseball, even if a lot of people fervently identify with one team or another. And I think the underlying question is not only about how we can galvanize people to recognize how the depression is being hastened and deepened by the right-wing Republican forces, which we certainly need to underscore and explain, but also to organize effectively to have these forces coalesce, workers, unemployed, underemployed, elderly, those who have loved ones who are elderly, 60. All of that, to make clear cause and effect. And the corporate media are doing pretty mixed to terrible job to explain that policies in Washington are deepening the crisis and increasing the misery. And the other thing I would say is that ultimately—
30 seconds.
This is driven, or partly driven, by the presidential race, and we need to really do something to resuscitate and energize the Democratic Party ticket, whatever it's going to be.
All right, we're going to take a brief timeout. I know a couple of you may have to leave. I'm going to ask you to see if you can stay another 5 minutes or so. We'll come right back. You are listening to the Jeff Santos Show, a special Zoom edition of the program. We'll be right back after this quick timeout.
Supporting the middle class. This is the Jeff Santos Show.
Welcome back. It is indeed the Jeff Santos Show. 33 minutes past the hour. We are with our super panel in hour one. Coming up in hour two, we'll be talking with University of Wisconsin professor at Green Bay, good friend Harvey Kaye. A little bit later, we'll be chatting with, of course, good friend Robert Craig, Wisconsin Citizen Action, John Nichols of The Nation, 3 Wisconsin boys there. Also, Rob Scott, the great economist at Economic Policy Institute. Wendell Potter will join us. And we'll also talk with Melissa Tomlinson of the best name in politics, Badass Teachers. But we are back here with Robert Borosage for a few more minutes. He's got an event. We're here also with our good friend Brian Garvey of Mass Peace Action, part of Peace Action. The great Norman Solomon from San Francisco's Roots Action is with us as well. And on the phone with us, Frank Watkins, Operation Rainbow Push. And of course, our great friend Rona Fried from sustainablebusiness.com. And our great callers, Peter from Plant City and John from Minneapolis. I'm going to go to John here first. John, if you have a question for any of our guests, go right ahead. Your floor.
Yeah, I have a comment. I think that securing payroll would be the best way to handle the economy, because it secures the businesses that these people are involved with, which, as it stands now, many of them will close and they will just go away. And these people, after their unemployment runs out, they won't have a job. So it makes much more sense to me anyway to pay 70-80% of payroll rather than just allow the businesses to go out of business. And as David said, since our insurance is connected with our employment, it also secures their health care, and hospitals are already losing, I think, about $50 billion as a result of the COVID-19. So anyway, that's my opinion about that. But I also have some interesting reports about the pandemic and how it's being
You worked in the hospital for
mismanaged.
many years. You understand that. Robert,
Yeah.
since I know you're on a tight deadline, what John's concern here, going back to the idea of keeping everybody on the payroll, I mean, we're seeing more and more of this. Have you talked with Representative Jayapal's office about how to, help her on this endeavor?
Yes, he's continuing to push. And just today, I believe, Chuck Schumer said that he was endorsing the measure and would push it in the Senate, which is good news.
Mhm.
There's two, I think now maybe 4 Republicans in the Senate that have indicated their support for a version of it. And so there's a possibility that whatever McConnell wants, it might be able to pass some decent measure through both houses to get this done. So this is gaining in support as time goes by, not losing support, even though it wasn't in the original Heroes bill out of the House. And so it's a good time to really push. And Jayapal's office has been spearheading this incredibly effectively. And I do think it's important. I think going back to the discussion about McConnell and where we are, this crisis is going to change and drive politics over the next few months. We come back in September, you're going to have a number of universities on the verge of collapse. You're going to have students kind of unsure about whether they go to school or not in public schools, and administrators struggling with how they're going to handle that. You're going to have hundreds of thousands, as was just said, hundreds of thousands of small businesses where they've spent through their reserves. They got maybe one shot to open and nobody comes and they're gone. And so this crisis is, the economic crisis, I think, is just building. It's not getting better. And the notion that you kind of reopen and everything will come back to normal, I think
that's insane.
Fantasy. And so that will drive the politicians, even McConnell, are going to have to respond to that. So it's a moment when progressives with answers and bold agendas should be pushing very hard. And it's a moment when Biden and others have to begin to rise to meet this challenge, to be able to define a course that Americans can see some hope in, because this is going to be very grim over the next months.
On that note, if I could just jump in.
Go right ahead, Norman.
There's a time that has arrived that is maybe unprecedented in our lifetimes, when the chance to dramatize how tying health coverage to employment is absolutely insane in humanistic terms. And millions of people now are facing or on the verge of losing their health insurance. So it seems to me to be a way to join a traditional progressive position for single payer Medicare for all to a broadly based, well understood need to provide health care for everybody.
Okay, I know, Robert, you have to run soon, so I want to have Peter in Plant City, if you're still with us. Peter, if you have any questions before Robert leaves for any of our panel here, Brian, Rona, Frank, Norman, go right ahead, Peter. Peter, you still there? I think we've lost Peter. All right.
Just as I check out, let me just give a plug to David Dayen and the work he's been doing at the American Prospect. The reporting they're doing, particularly on the corruption side and how the banks are making out like bandits in this, has been very important, and I recommend it to you all.
Great work.
I think it's also important what Norman Solomon is trying to do, which is sustaining the agenda and I think the independent campaign of the Sanders movement as a way of energizing young people and progressives in a way that Biden will find it difficult to do, I think is very important. We can all agree that the first step is getting rid of Trump, and I think the only way that's going to get people excited is if there's an independent campaign around a bold agenda that.
Robert, but one more. I want to get 30 seconds from you because I've been pushing this idea, and after the comments that Joe Biden said today to the Breakfast Club, an African American host, about the idea that if you are, if you're still trying to decide between myself and Donald Trump, you're not black. I'm really concerned that Biden is a stumble, every day, every week. And as he gets to be more and more on TV, this is problematic. Now, look, this is a long shot. Michelle Obama on a CBS YouGov poll was 64%. Out of, Warren was the next person in 46. If she was to become VP, it gives certain energy, but even more so for this selfish guy. And I'm going to stand up here. This is a Bernie shirt. I would like to have him become the VP. Now, I think that's a ticket that everyone on this panel would get excited about. I'm hoping it can happen. You have a comment before you leave, my friend?
Well, he's committed to having a woman, a commitment that I thought was badly thought out. But having made that commitment, he's not going to go back on it. If I had to choose between Michelle Obama and Elizabeth Warren, I'd certainly choose Elizabeth Warren. I'd rather have his successor be somebody anchored in a progressive agenda and commitment than Michelle Obama, who's a wonderful woman and an inspiration, but we don't even know what her politics are.
Well, my plan would be sort of what happened in 2000 is that Biden would have to resign because, we can't keep this up. Then Michelle takes over and then picks Bernie. That's the plan.
Well,
I know it's crazy. Call me crazy, but
if I can jump in, not only
ahead, Norman.
Such complicated three-dimensional pool shots are sort of like a stretch-off lotto ticket at the 7-Eleven. It's just not plausible. But also,
well,
I don't think
know.
we should
this
buy.
Is a strange time.
Yeah, it is. But I don't think we should buy into the kind of superstar. It doesn't matter what your experience is. Donald Trump mode of who should be in the Oval Office, and even if you leave aside Michelle Obama's praise for George W. Bush as sharing his values, we just need to deal with substance. And there's only one VP pick for Biden that shores up and widens the tent for a Biden campaign, and that is Elizabeth Warren. Everybody else who is being bandied about in the corporate media falls short.
I would agree with that. I just don't know if she's enough to get Joe Biden, who I think is an extremely weak candidate, over the top. I would say that if it was the other way around, if Warren was, the presidential pick, then I would say definitely. But I just don't know if she's enough. And look, I would prefer Bernie first, but Warren second, and then we go from there. But I'm just concerned, Norman, and I agree with you 100% that we shouldn't be just taking people. Look at Donald Trump. I mean, he doesn't even have a dog catcher experience. So there you go. All right.
Good work. I'm off. Take care.
Thank you, Robert, very much. Robert Borosage will be leaving us now. Well, let me ask this to Brian Garvey. There isn't a lot of discussion on the foreign policy side, Brian. But I have to tell you, I think that it is really important that we start discussing this. Now, maybe Miss Omar from Minnesota can become part of the lead here. I don't know if you're in touch with her office, but I was really glad to see her tweet last night.
Well, I think it's odd that foreign policy and issues of war and peace are not central to a presidential campaign, because after all, we are electing our next commander-in-chief in a nation that has the largest and most powerful military in the history of the world, and one that's been at war for now almost 20 years. I'll weigh in a little bit on the Veep stakes. I think another great pick for Joe Biden would be another politician from right here in Massachusetts, freshman Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley. Used to be a political director of a good friend of President Biden, John Kerry. And she may have not so much experience as an elected official, but I know that Stacey Abrams was being considered widely as a VP pick, and I believe the highest office she ever held was a member of the State House in Georgia. And I have to say, Congresswoman Pressley has been wonderful of War and Peace. To get back to something that Norman said earlier, this time during this pandemic where we can redefine how we get our health care and move away from the absolute insanity of people getting their health care through their employer, which is just connected with issues of discrimination and so many reasons not to do that. But I think it's also a moment for us to redefine what national security is. Right now, the death toll from this virus is over 90,000 people. That's over tenfold the soldiers that we have lost since 2001.
Wow.
So I think it is high time that we started investing in what really protects the American people. And that is universal health care, access to a doctor, paid sick leave. I'll tell you, if we had those policies right now, I think that death toll would be much lower. I think we need to redefine what national security is, and I think now is the time to do it.
Frank Watkins, if you're still with us, when you were part of the Jesse Jackson campaign in '84 and '88, he understood that the military was taking too many dollars out of infrastructure concerns in the African American community and the Rainbow Coalition that he founded. Is there a way to sort of, in a lot of ways, to bring back that Rainbow Coalition, particularly if there is an African American woman, or maybe as president, as I mentioned with Michelle Obama, that we can sort of get that Jesse Jackson narrative back?
Well, his classic example, I think, was in the Iowa debate where he would ask the audience, or he did ask the audience, how many of them had a VCR, which was,
right,
the instrument at that particular time, and virtually everybody in the audience raised their hand. And then he kind of hilariously asked, how many of you own an MX missile? And of course, nobody raised their hand.
Nobody raised their hand.
Seems like
I use that line myself quite a bit.
Yeah, he said it seems like we're making that we're not, buying what the world is making, or something to that effect. The point was people were buying, MX. I mean, they were buying VCRs, but they weren't buying MX missiles. But none of the VCRs were made in America, so it was affecting our unemployment. It wasn't a good priority, and we were wasting a lot of money on the military. So. Yes, foreign policy, reduction of the military budget were part of both the '84 and the '88 campaign. I just wanted to add to what Robert Borosage was talking about. I agree that the economic crisis is going to increase, and it's also going to increase precisely at a time probably when the health crisis is going to increase. We're going to, according to virtually all the medical and scientific experts, come the fall, we're also going to be hit with the flu and probably with a second, expression of the coronavirus. So we're going to have a medical crisis and an economic crisis hitting us at the same time, in all likelihood. don't have a guarantee that all of that's going to happen, but any rational discussion would seem to indicate that is going to be the case. And I don't know what the outcome of that's going to be with this kind of a leader that we have in the White House who said we're not going to shut down the economy again. Well, if we don't, that means the health crisis is going to escalate, because the only way we can get to a sound economy is through dealing with the health crisis first. I use the example of baseball, since I'm a baseball fan. The only way you can get to second base in baseball is to go through first base. The parallel is first base is healthcare, second base is the economy. And if we try to go to second base without touching first base, the umpire is going to call us out. And the umpire in this process is testing. If we don't test, trace, and treat, we can never get to second base. We can never get to the economy.
Well, that's a great point. We have actually been joined, even though he is a little early, by our good friend, the University of Wisconsin professor from Green Bay, great author on FDR, Harvey Kaye. Wanted to bring you in here quickly, Harvey, to get your thoughts on what Frank was just saying. Operation Rainbow Push, of course. I think these are, the Rainbow Coalition, what Jesse was saying back in '88, when he asked the question, how many folks out there own a VCR, and everybody raised their hand, and he asked the question, how many own an MX missile, and nobody did, and he said, we're making the wrong things. Well, people in Wisconsin would like to make the right things, particularly up in Green Bay, where they've lost a lot of jobs thanks to NAFTA and TPP and so forth. Your thoughts there?
Well, not to make light of what you just said, but the one thing about Green Bay is we're a big toilet paper producer. So fortunately, in fact, right now, I suppose they're working overtime in the plants. But your question is clearly directed at Wisconsin. If you look south of Green Bay to Milwaukee, to the Racine-Kenosha area, out to Janesville, I mean, it's devastating what happened. And I can tell you that students I've had over the years have a clear recollection, a very clear recollection of what happened to their father's jobs, the stress on the families, the breakups, and all of that. So in any kind of presidential campaign, clearly the ambition has to be how to make investments across the country, no less in the states that cost us, meaning those of us on the left, the presidency last time, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. So yeah, I mean, it's pressing. I'll also say that I have students who come from rural areas, and they are very keen on knowing what exactly the Democrats plan to do to revive rural America. Not necessarily the idea of big corporate farms, but how do you create jobs in rural America? And that's a good question.
Oh, that's for sure. Rona Fried, if you can, talk to us about the potential of reviving places like Green Bay, places like Youngstown, Ohio, with green jobs. How do you rank them in terms of where we can, help these struggling economies, particularly in the upper Midwest, of course, which is all the swing states that Joe Biden needs to win?
It would be so easy. Can you hear me?
Go right ahead, Rona. Yes, we can.
Okay. It would be so easy. We have everything that we need. We're ready to go. We have solar installers all over the country. Any state that showed that they needed more solar installers, you can be sure they would arise. The same thing for wind, for energy efficiency. We're ready to go. All we need is good policy.
And do you have specific ideas that, could help different parts? As Harvey is from Wisconsin, and of course we have people here in Massachusetts, our great caller, John from Minnesota. Do you think that, looking at the geography here in the country, for instance, Iowa has done a tremendous amount of good things under Republican governors with the issue of wind?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go right ahead. We can hear you. Fine.
Yeah, what I'm trying to say is that our goal in the environmental movement is for every single house, for every single rooftop that has adequate sun to have solar on the roof. It's so simple.
Right.
It's a numbers game. And, we have some wind in this country. We've been making great gains. We have, believe it or not, 500 manufacturers of wind components in this country. And we can go, all we have to do is go further, further. We're ready to go. Every house needs a solar panel. That creates millions of jobs right there.
Norman Solomon, you're in California. You're in the heart of progressive liberalism, progressive populist liberalism, the whole thing. It's right there in the Bay Area. So, can California lead the way here? We know that you guys have done a great job in reducing the carbon footprint there. The smog that used to be all over LA is dissipated. Take what Harvey's concerns were, but take it to your place in California, and what Rona is saying about, let's use California as a test case.
Well, California has partly led the way. I mean, we've had much better governorships in the last 10 years through Brown and now Newsom, but still there's been leading the way not so greatly from the Governor Brown administration in terms of cap and trade. It's real limits, it's market focused. We have the last two governors, Newsom and Brown, supporting fracking. So it's a compared to what? Because a Newsom governorship compared to Trump, I mean, it's just, there's no comparison, to put it mildly. And yet what we need is more of a visionary leadership team, not only in California, but even the West Coast, which is a great triumvirate of leadership of Oregon, Washington State, and California. We got a long way to go to redefine what is possible.
There's no doubt. Brian, I want to bring you in here because, again, all of these things need money, and we need to reduce this military footprint that we have, particularly the Middle East. I think the next president, whoever it might be, hopefully it is Sanders as part of the administration in some form, or if not, he has a role in it. We got to figure out a way to handle Iran. Saudi Arabia, to me, is a loose cannon, particularly with the leadership there. How do you look at this and try to bring over, which I know is part of peace action, to sort of redo the infrastructure, take a hold of climate change and so forth?
60.
Absolutely. I think the most important thing that President Joe Biden could do on day one is work to get us back into the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal.
Right.
This is a deal, and perhaps the greatest achievement of the Biden administration, and it was working. All the other countries agree. It was bringing Iran back into the community of nations. It was preventing
20 seconds.
This is something that we can do right away, and it would be a great achievement. We cannot go to war.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Norman Solomon. Thank you, John. Thank you, Frank Watkins, Rona Fried. We'll be right back with our new panel, including Harvey Kaye. It's the Jeff Santos Show.